Hey, everyone. Get ready, because I've got a super fun story for you today. It's all about a guy named Sam Miller, a quiet farmer who loved his little patch of land. Picture this, a sunny farm with rows of bright red tomatoes, crunchy orange carrots, and green beans so fresh you'd want to eat them right off the vine. Sam wasn't a loud guy. He didn't wear fancy clothes or drive a big truck. Nope, he was just a regular dude who liked growing his veggies and keeping to himself. His garden was his happy place, and everyone in town knew it was the best around. People would walk by and say, "Wow, Sam, your tomatoes look so juicy," or "Those carrots are perfect." Sam would just smile and nod. He didn't brag. He didn't need to. His garden spoke for itself. But here's where things get interesting. Sam had a neighbor named Karen. Oh boy, Karen was something else. She wasn't quiet like Sam. No way. She was loud, like, really loud. If you were outside, you could hear her yelling about something from a mile away. She was bossy, too. Always telling people what to do, even when they didn't ask. "Move your bike," she'd shout at kids riding by. "Cut your grass," she'd holler at the guy next door. Most people in town just rolled their eyes when Karen started talking. They'd whisper to each other, "There she goes again," and then go back to whatever they were doing. Karen was like a big, noisy storm that blew through and annoyed everyone. Now, Sam didn't pay much attention to Karen at first. He was too busy watering his plants and pulling weeds. He'd wave at her sometimes when she was outside, just to be nice. "Morning, Karen," he'd call out, and she'd grunt or say something sassy back like, "Your fence looks dumb, Sam." Sam didn't care. He figured she was just being Karen. He didn't think she'd ever mess with him. After all, why would she? He wasn't bothering anyone. He was just a guy with a garden, living his simple, quiet life. But here's the thing, Karen wasn't just loud and bossy. She was sneaky, too. Sam didn't know it yet, but she had her eye on something that belonged to him. She wasn't the kind of person who liked playing by the rules. Oh no, Karen thought she could do whatever she wanted. And that's where our story really starts to heat up. Something big was coming, something that would flip Sam's peaceful little world upside down. Can you guess what it was? I'll give you a hint, it had to do with his garden. But we're not there yet. Let's slow down and set the scene a little more, because this is where the fun begins. Imagine Sam's farm for a second. It wasn't huge, but it was perfect. There was a little white house with a red roof where Sam lived. Around the house was his garden, all neat and tidy. The tomatoes grew in big, round clusters, so red they almost glowed in the sun. The carrots poked out of the dirt just enough to show their bright orange tops. There were green beans hanging on little vines, and even some lettuce that looked so crisp you'd want to make a salad right there. Sam loved every inch of it. He'd wake up early every morning, put on his old straw hat, and head outside with a big smile. He'd water the plants with a hose, pull out any weeds that popped up, and sometimes just sit there, looking at how pretty it all was. "This is my little piece of heaven," he'd say to himself. The town loved Sam's garden, too. Kids would ride their bikes by and wave at him. "Hi, Sam," they'd yell, and he'd wave back. Sometimes people would stop and chat. "How do you get those tomatoes so big?" they'd ask. Sam would shrug and say, "Just give 'em water and sunshine, I guess." He didn't act like he was special, even though everyone knew he had a gift for growing things. His garden wasn't just pretty, it was tasty, too. If you ever got a carrot from Sam, you'd bite into it and go, "Wow, this is the best carrot ever." Same with the tomatoes. Juicy, sweet, and perfect. People said Sam could grow anything. But not everyone was nice about it. See, Karen lived right next door. Her house was close enough that Sam could see it from his garden. It was a yellow house with a messy yard, grass too long, old junk piled up by the porch. Karen didn't care about her own place, but she sure noticed Sam's. She'd stand by her fence sometimes, staring over at his veggies. Sam didn't think much of it at first. He'd see her looking and just figure she liked the view. Maybe she's jealous, he thought once, but then he'd laugh it off. Nah, why would she care about my little garden? Oh, Sam, if only you knew. Karen wasn't just jealous. She was up to something. She had a plan, a sneaky, selfish plan. She didn't tell anyone about it, of course. That's not how Karen worked. She liked to keep things secret until she got what she wanted. And what did she want? Well, let's just say she had her eye on Sam's veggies. Not because she loved them or wanted to grow her own. Nope. Karen wanted them because they were there, and she thought she deserved them. That's the kind of person she was. If something was good, she'd try to take it, whether it was hers or not. Sam didn't suspect a thing. He went about his days like always. Wake up, water the plants, pull weeds, maybe sit on his porch with a glass of lemonade in the afternoon. His life was calm and happy. The sun would shine, the birds would sing, and his garden would grow. It was perfect, or at least, it seemed that way. But trouble was creeping closer, like a shadow you don't notice until it's right behind you. Karen was watching, waiting, and getting ready to make her move. Sam's peaceful little farm was about to get a big shake-up, and he had no idea what was coming. Let's paint the picture a little more. Sam's farm was on the edge of a small town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. There was a little store down the road where people bought milk and bread. A school where kids laughed and played at recess. A park with a swing set and a picnic table. It was a friendly spot, and Sam fit right in. He wasn't the loudest guy, but people liked him. He was kind, he was quiet, and he shared his veggies sometimes. If someone's mom was sick, Sam might drop off a basket of tomatoes and say, "Hope she feels better." That's just who he was. Karen, though. She didn't fit in quite the same way. People didn't hate her, but they didn't love her either. She'd march around town like she owned it, telling people what to do. "Your dog barks too much," she'd yell at old Mr. Johnson. "Pick up that trash," she'd snap at the kids by the park. Most folks just ignored her. "That's Karen," they'd say, shrugging. "She's always like that." But Sam didn't know her well enough to see the trouble she could cause. He'd only lived next to her for a year, and he figured she was just grumpy. He didn't think she'd ever cross a line. Boy, was he wrong. The days went by, and Sam kept tending his garden. He'd kneel in the dirt, his hands muddy, pulling weeds or picking ripe tomatoes. The sun would beat down, but he didn't mind. He liked the warmth on his back. He'd hum a little tune sometimes, just happy to be outside. His straw hat kept the sun off his face, and his old boots crunched in the soil. Everything was normal. Peaceful. Perfect. The tomatoes got redder, the carrots got crunchier, and Sam kept smiling. He had no clue that Karen was about to stir up a mess. Now, let's zoom in on Karen for a bit. She wasn't always loud and bossy, you know. Some folks in town said she used to be nicer, back when she first moved in. But something changed. Maybe she got mad at the world. Maybe she just liked being in charge. Whatever it was, she wasn't the neighbor you'd want to have. Her house was a mess, but she didn't care. She'd sit on her porch sometimes, sipping soda and glaring at everyone who walked by. And when she looked at Sam's garden, her eyes got narrow, like she was thinking hard. Plotting. Planning. Sam didn't see it, though. He was too busy living his quiet life. He'd wave at Karen like always, and she'd grunt or ignore him. "Morning, Karen," he'd say, and she'd mutter, "Yeah, whatever." Sam didn't take it personally. He figured she was just having a bad day every day. He didn't know she was watching his garden closer than ever. He didn't know she was counting his tomatoes, eyeing his carrots, thinking, "Those should be mine." Karen wasn't just grumpy. She was greedy. And that greed was about to kick off something wild. Picture this one morning. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky pink and orange. Sam stepped outside with his watering can, ready to start his day. The air was cool, the grass was wet with dew, and his garden looked amazing. The tomatoes sparkled with little drops of water from the night before. The carrots peeked out of the dirt like little orange treasures. Sam took a deep breath and smiled. Another good day, he said to himself. He had no idea that Karen was awake, too, peeking out her window. She wasn't smiling. She was scheming. That's where our story starts to twist. Sam's quiet, happy life was about to get loud, and not in a good way. Karen had a plan, and it wasn't nice. She wasn't going to ask for Sam's veggies. She wasn't going to trade or buy them. Nope. She was going to take them. Sneaky, right? Sam didn't suspect a thing. He didn't know his perfect little farm was about to turn into a battlefield. But it was coming. Trouble was on its way, and it had Karen's name written all over it. So, what do you think Karen did next? Can you guess? Did she sneak over and grab something? Did she try to trick Sam? Drop your ideas in the comments. I want to hear what you think. This is just the beginning, and trust me, it's going to get wild. Sam's peaceful days were numbered, and Karen was about to make sure of it. Stick around, because you won't believe what happens next. Alright, friends, let's keep this story rolling. We've got Sam Miller, our quiet farmer, living his happy little life on his perfect farm. His tomatoes are red and juicy, his carrots are crunchy and sweet, and his garden is the talk of the town. Everyone loves Sam, well, almost everyone. Then there's Karen, his loud, bossy neighbor who's got her sneaky eyes on Sam's veggies. She's up to no good, and Sam doesn't even know it yet. His peaceful days are about to get a whole lot messy, and it's all because of Karen. So, let's dive back in and see how this tale starts to twist. Sam's farm wasn't just a garden, it was his pride and joy. Every morning, he'd step outside with his old straw hat on his head and a big smile on his face. The sun would be shining, the birds would be chirping, and the air would smell like fresh dirt and growing things. He'd grab his watering can, fill it up from the hose, and walk down the rows of plants. "Good morning, tomatoes," he'd say, pouring water at their roots. "Looking good, carrots," he'd add, giving them a little splash. Sam talked to his plants like they were his friends. Maybe they were. He didn't have a big family or a bunch of buddies, but he had his garden, and that was enough for him. The town was small and cozy, just a little spot with a few houses, a store, and a school. Everyone knew Sam because of his veggies. Kids would ride their bikes past his farm and yell, "Hey, Sam! Got any carrots today?" Sometimes he'd toss them one, just for fun. "Don't tell your mom it's not washed," he'd call out, laughing. The grown-ups liked him, too. Mrs. Harper, who lived down the road, once said, "Sam, your tomatoes are better than anything I can buy at the store." Sam would just blush a little and say, "Ah, thanks. It's nothing special." But it was special. His garden was like magic, and everyone could see it, everyone except Karen, who only saw something she wanted to take. Karen's house was right next to Sam's, so close he could hear her yelling from his porch. Her yard was a mess: tall grass, old cans, a rusty chair she never sat in. She didn't care about fixing it up. Nope, she spent her time watching Sam instead. She'd lean on her fence sometimes, arms crossed, staring at his garden. Sam didn't think much of it. He'd wave and say, "Hey, Karen." She'd grunt or mumble something mean like, "Your plants are too bright. They hurt my eyes." Sam would just shrug and keep working. He didn't know she wasn't joking. She wasn't just grumpy, she was jealous. Really jealous. And jealous people? They don't always play nice. Let's set the scene a little more. It was summer, and the days were long and hot. Sam's garden was at its best. The tomatoes hung heavy on the vines, so red they looked like little suns. The carrots poked out of the ground, orange and perfect. The green beans dangled like tiny presents, and the lettuce was so green it almost sparkled. Sam would spend hours out there, kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds, or picking whatever was ripe. His hands would get muddy, his shirt would get sweaty, but he didn't mind. He'd sit back on his heels sometimes, wipe his forehead, and just look at it all. "Pretty good," he'd say to himself. "Pretty darn good." Meanwhile, Karen was plotting. She didn't have a garden of her own. She didn't want to work for one, either. Why bother planting seeds and watering them when Sam's stuff was right there, ripe and ready? That's how she thought. She'd watch him from her window, sipping her soda, thinking, "Those tomatoes look good. Those carrots look tasty." She didn't care that they were Sam's. In her mind, if she wanted something, it was hers. That's Karen for you, selfish and sneaky, wrapped up in a big, loud package. Sam didn't see any of this coming. He was too busy enjoying his days. One morning, he woke up early, just as the sun peeked over the trees. The sky was pink and gold, and the air was cool. He grabbed his hat, slipped on his boots, and headed outside. His garden was waiting, all quiet and beautiful. He started watering, humming a little song. "Gonna be a nice day," he said to the plants. "Lots of sunshine for you guys." He didn't know Karen was awake, too. She was standing at her back door, looking out at his garden, her eyes sharp and greedy. She wasn't humming. She was planning. The town went on like normal that day. Kids rode their bikes down the street, laughing and shouting. Cars drove by slow, people waving at each other. The little store had its door open, and Mr. Jenkins, the owner, was sweeping the sidewalk. "Morning, Sam," he called out when Sam walked by later to grab some seeds. "Morning," Sam called back, tipping his hat. Everything felt right. Calm. Happy. But trouble was brewing, and it was closer than Sam could imagine. Karen didn't talk to Sam much, but she watched him all the time. She'd see him out there, working hard, and it made her mad. "Why does he get all the good stuff?" she'd mutter to herself. "I deserve some of that, too." She didn't think about asking. She didn't think about trading. Nope, Karen had a different idea, one that didn't involve being nice. She'd wait until Sam wasn't looking, and then she'd make her move. Sneaky, right? That's how she rolled. Let's go back to Sam for a minute. He wasn't perfect, but he was a good guy. He didn't fight with people. He didn't yell or get mad. If something went wrong, like if a storm knocked over his tomato plants, he'd just fix it and move on. "No use crying over it," he'd say. That's why he didn't suspect Karen. He didn't think anyone would mess with him on purpose. He trusted people, maybe too much. And Karen? She was about to take advantage of that trust in a big way. The days kept passing, and Sam's garden kept growing. The tomatoes got bigger, the carrots got sweeter, and the green beans got longer. People in town started talking about it more. "Sam's got the best garden again this year," they'd say at the store. "You should see those tomatoes." Sam didn't brag, but he was proud. He'd smile when he heard stuff like that, even if he didn't say much. His garden was his way of showing who he was: quiet, hardworking, and happy. But Karen didn't see it that way. She didn't care about Sam's hard work. She didn't care that he loved his garden. All she saw was something she wanted, something she thought she could take. She'd stand by her fence, watching him pick veggies, and her frown would get deeper. "He's got too much," she'd grumble. "He doesn't need all that." She wasn't planning to ask Sam for anything. She wasn't going to say, "Hey, can I have a tomato?" Nope. Karen had a trick up her sleeve, and it was about to change everything. One evening, Sam was sitting on his porch after a long day. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and purple. He had a glass of lemonade in his hand, cold and sweet. He looked out at his garden and sighed. "Life's good," he said to himself. The crickets were chirping, the air was warm, and everything felt perfect. He didn't know Karen was watching from her window, her mind racing with bad ideas. He didn't know his quiet life was about to get loud and crazy. That's where the real story starts, friends. Sam's peaceful farm was about to turn into a wild adventure, all because of Karen and her sneaky ways. She wasn't just a grumpy neighbor anymore, she was a thief in the making. Sam didn't see it yet, but he'd find out soon enough. His garden, his pride and joy, was in danger, and Karen was the one bringing the trouble. So, what do you think Karen did next? Did she sneak over and grab something? Did she wait for the perfect moment? Drop your guesses in the comments. I can't wait to see what you come up with. This is just the start, and trust me, it's going to get juicy. Sam's quiet days are about to end, and Karen's about to stir up a mess he'll never forget. Stick with me, because you won't believe what happens next. Alright, friends, here's where things start to get exciting. Sam Miller, our quiet farmer with the amazing garden, was having a nice, sunny day until everything changed. Let's jump into this part of the story where the trouble really begins. Get ready, because Karen's sneaky ways are about to make Sam's peaceful life a whole lot messy. It was a bright afternoon. The sun was high in the sky, shining down on Sam's little farm. The air was warm, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves on his tomato plants. Sam stepped outside his house, like he did every day, ready to check on his garden. He had his old straw hat on, keeping the sun off his face, and his boots crunched on the dirt path. He was smiling, thinking about how good his veggies looked. The tomatoes were red and plump, the carrots were orange and crunchy, and everything was growing just right. Another perfect day, he said to himself, taking a deep breath of that fresh farm air. But then he stopped. Right there in the middle of his garden, he froze. Something wasn't right. He squinted his eyes and looked closer. His garden looked weird. Half his tomatoes were gone. Just poof, missing. The vines where they used to hang were empty, like someone had snatched them away. And his carrots? Oh no, his carrots were a mess. Some were dug up and gone, leaving little holes in the dirt. Others were snapped off, with just the green tops left behind. Sam's heart sank. What happened here? He whispered, scratching his head under his hat. At first, he thought it was animals. Maybe rabbits had hopped in and nibbled his carrots. Or maybe a deer had wandered through and munched on his tomatoes. That happens sometimes on farms, right? He bent down to look closer, hoping to see little paw prints or some clue. But then he saw a footprint. Not a tiny rabbit footprint or a deer hoof mark. Nope. This was a human footprint, big and clear, pressed right into the soft dirt next to his carrot patch. Sam's eyes got wide. He stood up straight and looked at that footprint again. It wasn't his. His boots had a different shape, with little lines on the bottom. This print was smooth and flat, like from a sneaker. Someone was here, he said out loud, his voice shaking a little. Sam's mind started racing. Who would come into his garden and take his stuff? He didn't lock his gate, it was just a little farm, and he trusted people in town. He looked around, hoping to spot something else, like a dropped glove or a piece of cloth. But there was nothing. Just that footprint, staring back at him like a big, rude surprise. He rubbed his chin and thought hard. Maybe it was an accident, he told himself. Maybe someone tripped in here and grabbed a tomato by mistake. But deep down, he knew that didn't make sense. Half his tomatoes and a bunch of carrots don't just disappear by accident. Later that day, Sam decided to take a walk around his farm. He wanted to calm down and figure things out. The sun was still shining, and the birds were still singing, but Sam didn't feel so happy anymore. He kept picturing that footprint in his head. Who did it belong to? As he walked near the fence that separated his farm from Karen's house, he heard a noise. Crunch, crunch, crunch. He turned his head and saw her Karen standing on her side of the fence. She was holding something orange in her hand, and she was chomping on it like it was the best snack ever. Sam squinted to get a better look. That orange thing, it looked familiar. Too familiar. It was a carrot, long, crunchy, and bright, just like the ones from his garden. His stomach twisted. He took a step closer and called out, "Hey, Karen. Where'd you get that carrot?" His voice was friendly, but inside, he was starting to feel suspicious. Karen stopped chewing for a second and looked at him. Then she grinned a smug, sneaky grin that made Sam's skin prickle. "Oh, these," she said, holding up the carrot like it was no big deal. She took another loud bite and kept talking with her mouth full. "I just borrowed a few things. You've got so much, Sam, you won't even miss it." She laughed a little, like it was a joke, and then turned away, still munching. Sam stood there, staring at her. Borrowed. That word hit him like a slap. You don't borrow carrots and tomatoes. You don't dig them up and eat them without asking. His face got hot, and his hands clenched into fists. He felt his blood boiling, like water bubbling in a pot. Karen had just admitted it, she took his stuff. That footprint? It had to be hers. She didn't even try to hide it. She stood there, eating his carrot, acting like she owned the place. Sam wanted to yell. He wanted to say, "Those are mine. You can't just take them." But he didn't. Not yet. Sam was a calm guy, and he wasn't ready to start a fight. Not right then. Instead, he took a deep breath and forced himself to stay cool. He unclenched his fists and let his shoulders relax. "Okay, Karen," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Just, don't do it again, all right?" She didn't answer. She just shrugged and walked back toward her house, still chewing. Sam watched her go, his mind spinning. He couldn't believe it. His neighbor, his loud, bossy neighbor, had snuck into his garden and stolen his veggies. And she didn't even care. As the sun started to dip lower in the sky, Sam went back to his garden. He stood there, looking at the empty spots where his tomatoes used to be. The little holes where his carrots once grew stared up at him like sad eyes. He felt mad, but more than that, he felt hurt. He'd worked so hard on this garden. Every day, he watered those plants. He pulled weeds. He made sure they got enough sun. And now Karen had just waltzed in and taken whatever she wanted, like it was nothing. That's not fair, he muttered, kicking a clump of dirt with his boot. But here's the thing, Karen didn't know who she was messing with. Sam might have been quiet, but he wasn't weak. He wasn't the kind of guy who'd just let this go. Sure, he didn't yell at her right then. He didn't stomp over to her house and bang on her door. But inside, something was waking up. A little spark of fire was growing in Sam's chest. Karen thought she could take his stuff and get away with it. She thought Sam was too nice to do anything about it. Oh, she was so wrong. She just picked a fight with the wrong farmer, and she didn't even realize it yet. Let's rewind a bit and picture that moment again. Sam standing there, the sun warm on his back, staring at his messed up garden. The tomatoes that were left hung quietly on their vines, like they were waiting for him to fix things. The carrot patch looked like a battlefield, with dirt scattered everywhere. That footprint was still there, mocking him. Sam bent down and touched it with his fingers, feeling the edges in the soil. Karen, he whispered to himself. He didn't have proof, not solid proof, but he knew. Deep down, he knew it was her. Back at her house, Karen was probably laughing. She'd gotten away with it, or so she thought. She'd taken Sam's veggies, eaten one right in front of him, and walked off like she was the queen of the world. She didn't feel bad. Not one bit. In her mind, Sam had too much anyway. He's got a whole garden, she probably told herself. Why should I go to the store when his stuff is right there? That's how Karen worked. She didn't care about rules or being fair. She just took what she wanted and expected everyone to deal with it. But Sam wasn't okay with that. As he stood in his garden, the anger bubbled up again. He thought about all the mornings he'd spent out there, watering and weeding. He thought about the hot afternoons when he'd sweat under the sun, making sure his plants were happy. He thought about how proud he felt when people in town said, "Sam, your garden's the best." And now Karen had stomped all over that pride. She didn't just take his veggies, she took his hard work. His happiness. His trust. The sun was getting lower now, painting the sky orange and pink. Sam walked back to his porch and sat down on his old wooden chair. He didn't have his lemonade this time. He just sat there, staring out at his garden, thinking. He could still hear Karen's voice in his head, "I just borrowed a few things." Borrowed. That word made him mad all over again. You borrow a pencil and give it back. You don't borrow a carrot and eat it? He shook his head and muttered, "She's not getting away with this." That's when the tension really started to build. Sam wasn't loud like Karen. He didn't yell or make a big fuss. But he was tough in his own way. He had a quiet strength, the kind that sneaks up on you. Karen didn't see it. She thought Sam was soft, easy to push around. She thought he'd just shrug and let her keep stealing. But she didn't know him, not really. Sam was like one of his plants, steady and strong, growing even when no one noticed. And now he was starting to grow a plan. Let's picture Sam sitting there on his porch. The crickets were chirping, and the air was cooling off. His garden looked sad in the fading light, with those empty spots where his veggies used to be. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. His face wasn't smiling anymore. It was serious, like he was thinking hard. He didn't know exactly what he'd do yet, but he knew one thing for sure, Karen had crossed a line. She'd taken his stuff, laughed in his face, and acted like it was no big deal. That wasn't okay. Not to Sam. Meanwhile, Karen was probably inside her messy house, kicking back with her stolen carrots. Maybe she was eating another one right then, crunching away without a care. She didn't think Sam would fight back. He's too nice, she probably told herself. He won't do anything. Oh, how wrong she was. Karen had no idea what she'd started. She thought she'd won, but she'd just lit a match. And that match was about to start a fire she wouldn't see coming. Sam didn't sleep much that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind buzzing. He kept seeing that footprint in his head. He kept hearing Karen's smug voice. "You won't even miss it," she'd said. Every time he thought about it, his fists clenched under the blanket. He wasn't just mad, he was determined. He didn't know how yet, but he was going to teach Karen a lesson. She couldn't just take his stuff and get away with it. Not this time. The next morning, Sam got up early. The sun wasn't even up yet, but he couldn't stay in bed. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his hat, and went outside. The sky was still dark, with just a hint of light on the horizon. His garden was quiet, waiting for him. He walked over to the carrot patch and looked at those little holes again. He touched the dirt where the footprint had been. "Karen," he said under his breath. "You picked the wrong guy." That's where the real tension kicked in, friends. Sam wasn't the same quiet farmer anymore. He was still calm on the outside, but inside, he was ready to fight back. Karen had pushed him too far, and now she was going to find out what happens when you mess with someone like Sam. She thought she'd won this round, but the game was just starting. Sam wasn't going to let her stomp all over his garden or his life anymore. So, what do you think Sam's going to do next? How's he going to get back at Karen? Drop your ideas in the comments, I'd love to hear them. This is where the story gets wild, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming. Karen's in for a big surprise, and Sam's about to show her he's not as soft as she thinks. Hey, friends. We're back with Sam and Karen, and things are heating up fast. Last time, Sam found his garden messed up, tomatoes gone, carrots missing, and a sneaky human footprint in the dirt. Then he caught Karen munching on one of his carrots, acting like it was no big deal. Sam's mad now, but he's keeping it cool for now. Karen thinks she's won, but she's about to find out she messed with the wrong farmer. Let's keep going and see how this tension builds. Sam stood there in the early morning light, staring at his garden. The sky was turning pink and gold, but he didn't feel the usual happiness. His carrots were gone, his tomatoes were picked, and that footprint was still burned into his mind. He could still hear Karen's voice, all smug and sassy, "I just borrowed a few things. You won't even miss it?" Every time he thought about it, his stomach twisted. Borrowed. That wasn't borrowing, that was stealing. Sam wasn't the kind of guy to freak out or yell, but right then, he felt something new. A little fire was growing inside him, and it wasn't going away. He walked over to his porch and sat down hard on his chair. The wood creaked under him, and he crossed his arms tight. His hat was still on, shading his eyes, but you could tell he wasn't calm anymore. His jaw was tight, and his fingers tapped on his arm. He kept looking at the empty spots in his garden, the holes where his carrots used to be, the naked vines where his tomatoes once hung. It wasn't just about the veggies. It was about what they meant. Sam had worked hard for every single one. He'd planted the seeds, watered them, pulled weeds, and watched them grow. And Karen? She just took them like they were hers. Across the fence, Karen's house was quiet. The sun was up now, shining on her messy yard, tall grass, old junk, a broken chair by the porch. She was probably still asleep, dreaming of her next snack. Maybe she was even laughing in her sleep, thinking about how she'd tricked Sam. She didn't feel bad, not one bit. To her, it was a game. Sam's got plenty, she probably told herself. He won't care. But Sam did care. He cared a lot. And that's why this wasn't over. Sam leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. He could still picture Karen standing there, chomping on that carrot with that goofy grin. "You won't even miss it," she'd said. Those words stuck in his head like gum on a shoe. He wanted to march over to her house right then, bang on her door, and say, "Give me my stuff back." But he didn't. Not yet. Sam was smart. He knew yelling wouldn't fix this. Karen wouldn't say sorry or hand over the veggies she'd already eaten. Nope, she'd just laugh harder. He had to think bigger. He had to do something she wouldn't expect. The morning went on, and Sam stayed on his porch, thinking. The birds chirped, the sun climbed higher, and the town started waking up. Kids rode their bikes down the road, shouting and laughing. A car honked somewhere nearby. But Sam didn't move. He kept staring at his garden, replaying everything in his head. That footprint. Karen's grin. The missing tomatoes. It all added up to one thing: She'd crossed a line. And Sam wasn't going to let it slide. Let's picture that garden again. It was still pretty, even with the damage. The tomatoes that were left glowed red in the sunlight. The carrot tops that hadn't been pulled waved in the breeze. The green beans hung on their vines, safe for now. But those empty spots? They looked wrong. Like holes in a puzzle. Sam hated seeing them. Every time he looked, he felt that fire in his chest get hotter. He wasn't just mad at Karen, he was mad at himself, too. I should have locked the gate, he thought. I should have watched closer. But then he shook his head. No. This isn't my fault. It's hers. Back at Karen's house, she finally poked her head outside. She stepped onto her porch, stretching and yawning like nothing had happened. Sam saw her from his spot and narrowed his eyes. She didn't look sorry. She didn't look nervous. She just stood there, sipping a soda, acting like the queen of the world. Sam's hands clenched again. He could still see that carrot in his mind, his carrot crunching between her teeth. She didn't even say thank you. She didn't ask. She just took it and bragged about it. Karen glanced over at Sam's farm and smirked. She could see him sitting there, but she didn't wave or say hi. Nope, she turned away and went back inside, slamming her door loud enough for him to hear. That slam was like a dare. What are you gonna do about it, Sam? It seemed to say. And that's when Sam decided, he was going to do something. He didn't know what yet, but he wasn't going to let Karen win. Not this time. Sam stood up and walked back to his garden. He knelt down by the carrot patch and ran his fingers over the dirt. The hole stared up at him, and that footprint was still there, clear as day. He pressed his hand into the soil next to it, feeling the cool earth under his skin. She did this, he said quietly. She came in here and took my stuff. Saying it out loud made it real. It made him madder. But it also made him think. If Karen could sneak in once, she'd do it again. She'd keep taking until there was nothing left. Sam couldn't let that happen. He stood up and brushed the dirt off his hands. The sun was high now, beating down on his hat. He looked over at Karen's house again. The curtains were closed, but he knew she was in there, probably eating more of his veggies. That thought made his stomach turn. He imagined her sitting at her table, munching on his tomatoes, laughing to herself. She thinks I'm a pushover, he said under his breath. She thinks I won't fight back. But Sam wasn't a pushover. He was quiet, sure, but he was strong, too. And he was starting to feel that strength wake up. The tension was thick now, like a storm cloud hanging over the farm. Sam wasn't the same guy he'd been yesterday. Yesterday, he was happy, trusting, carefree. Today he was mad. Today he was ready. Karen had poked the bear, and she didn't even know it. She thought she'd gotten away with her little trick, but Sam was already planning his next move. He didn't want to just yell at her or tell her off. That wouldn't stop her. He needed something bigger, something that would make her think twice before ever stepping into his garden again. Let's zoom in on Sam for a minute. He wasn't tall or loud or scary looking. He was just a regular guy, brown hair, a little sunburn on his nose, old boots with mud on them. But right then, standing in his garden, he looked different. His eyes were sharp, like he was figuring something out. His shoulders were squared, like he was ready to carry a heavy load. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was serious. Karen had lit a spark in him, and that spark was turning into a flame. Across the fence, Karen had no clue. She was probably kicking back in her messy house, feet up on a chair, sipping her soda. Maybe she was eating another carrot, crunch, 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 smirking to herself. Sam's too nice, she probably thought. He won't do a thing. She didn't know he was outside, staring at her house, his mind racing. She didn't know he was done being nice. She'd pushed him too far, and now the fight was on. Sam walked back to his porch and sat down again. He didn't say anything this time. He just watched. The sun moved across the sky, shadows stretching over his garden. The town kept going, kids laughing, dogs barking, cars rolling by. But Sam's world was different now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense. Quiet on the outside, but loud in his head. He kept thinking about that footprint. He kept hearing Karen's laugh. And every time he did, that fire inside him grew a little more. The day went on, and Sam stayed put. He didn't water his plants like usual. He didn't pull weeds. He just sat and thought. People walked by and waved, "Hey, Sam." But he barely waved back. His mind was somewhere else. He was picturing Karen sneaking into his garden at night, her sneakers squishing in the dirt, her hands grabbing his tomatoes. He imagined her giggling as she ran off with his carrots. It made him so mad he could hardly sit still. But he did. He stayed calm. He had to. Because Sam wasn't going to lose his cool, he was going to use it. Karen came outside again later, just as the sun was getting low. She stood on her porch, stretching her arms, looking over at Sam's farm. She saw him sitting there and smirked again. "Hey, Sam," she yelled, her voice loud and annoying. "Your garden looks a little empty today." She laughed, like it was the funniest thing ever, and then went back inside. Sam didn't answer. He just watched her go, his eyes narrow. Her words stung, but they also made him surer than ever. She was taunting him now. She wanted him to know she'd done it. And that was her big mistake. Sam leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on his knees. "You think this is funny, Karen," he whispered to himself. "We'll see who's laughing soon." He didn't know what he'd do yet, but he knew it'd be good. Something smart. Something sneaky. Something that'd hit Karen right where it hurt. She'd picked a fight with the wrong farmer, and Sam was ready to show her why. The tension was everywhere now. You could feel it in the air, like the quiet before a big storm. Sam wasn't the same guy who'd woken up yesterday with a smile. He was tougher now, sharper. Karen had taken his veggies, sure, but she'd taken something else, too, his trust. And that was something Sam wasn't going to let her have. She thought she'd won this round, but the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. So, what do you think, friends? What's Sam going to do next? How's he going to get back at Karen for stealing his stuff? Drop your guesses in the comments, I can't wait to hear them. This story's getting wild, and the best part's still coming. Karen's in big trouble, and Sam's about to make sure she knows it. Hey, friends. We're diving deeper into Sam and Karen's wild story now, and it's getting super exciting. Sam's garden got raided, his tomatoes, carrots, and hard work snatched by his sneaky neighbor Karen. She even ate a carrot right in front of him, acting like it was no big deal. Sam was mad at first, but now he's got a plan brewing. Karen's about to find out she messed with the wrong farmer. Let's see how this part unfolds with some sneaky moves and big surprises. Days went by after that sunny afternoon when Sam caught Karen with his carrot. The sun kept shining, the birds kept singing, and Sam's garden kept growing. But it wasn't the same anymore. Every morning, Sam would step outside with his straw hat and boots, expecting to see more missing veggies. And he was right. Karen didn't stop. Nope, she got bolder. She didn't care that Sam knew she was the thief. She acted like his garden was her own little store, free for the taking. At first, it was just a tomato here or a carrot there. But then Karen started sneaking over at night. When the moon was up and the town was quiet, she'd tiptoe across the fence line. Sam's farm was dark, with just the crickets chirping and the stars twinkling. Karen would slip into his garden, her sneakers squishing in the dirt, and grab whatever she could. Cucumbers long and green disappeared from the vines. Peppers yellow and red vanished overnight. She'd snatch anything that looked ripe and yummy, stuffing her pockets or her shirt with Sam's hard work. Sam didn't catch her every time. Most nights, he was asleep in his little white house, dreaming about his plants. But one night, he couldn't sleep. The wind was rattling his windows, and his mind kept buzzing about Karen. He sat up in bed, rubbed his eyes, and thought, I bet she's out there right now. So he grabbed his flashlight, the big one with the bright beam, and slipped on his boots. No hat this time, just his pajamas and a hunch. He crept outside, quiet as a mouse, and headed to his garden. The air was cool, and the moon was full, lighting up the farm just enough to see. Sam clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam across the rows of plants. That's when he saw her, Karen. She was right there, bent over his cucumber vines, pulling off a big one with both hands. Her hair was messy, and she had a sneaky grin on her face. Sam's heart jumped. Hey, he shouted, pointing the light right at her. "What are you doing?" Karen froze for a second, caught like a deer in the road. Then she stood up straight, holding the cucumber like a prize. She didn't run. She didn't drop it. Nope, she laughed. "Oh, relax, Sam," she said, her voice loud and sassy even in the dark. "It's not like you're selling this stuff." She waved the cucumber at him, like it was a toy, and then turned around. Sam watched, his mouth open, as she waltzed off back to her house, her sneakers crunching on the grass. She didn't care that he'd seen her. She didn't even try to hide it. She just took his cucumber and left, laughing the whole way. Sam stood there, flashlight shaking in his hand. The beam bounced around the garden, lighting up the empty spots where Karen had been. He clicked it off and let the darkness settle in. For a minute, he felt that old anger bubbling up again. His face got hot, and his fists clenched tight. "She laughed at me," he whispered to himself. "She took my stuff and laughed." He wanted to chase after her, yank that cucumber back, and tell her to stay away. But he didn't. He took a deep breath, let it out slow, and walked back to his house. This wasn't the time to yell. This was the time to think. The next morning, Sam woke up different. He wasn't mad anymore, at least, not the kind of mad that makes you shout. That fire in his chest had turned into something else. Something smarter. He put on his hat, grabbed his coffee, and went outside to look at his garden. The sun was shining, and the plants still looked pretty, but those missing cucumbers stung his eyes. He knelt down by the vines and touched the spot where Karen had been. "She's not stopping," he said quietly. "She's going to keep coming." That's when Sam started watching her. Not in a creepy way, just smart. Every day, he'd keep an eye on Karen's house from his porch or his garden. He'd sip his coffee and pretend to pull weeds, but really, he was studying her. He noticed things. Like how she didn't come over during the day anymore, only at night, when she thought he was asleep. He saw how she always went for the ripest stuff, the brightest tomatoes, the fattest cucumbers, the reddest peppers. She didn't take the small ones or the green ones. Nope, she wanted the best, the stuff Sam worked hardest to grow. Days turned into a week, and Karen kept sneaking. Sam didn't catch her every time, but he knew she was there. He'd wake up and find more holes in his garden, peppers gone, beans missing, even a squash one time. She was like a raccoon, but louder and sassier. Sam could have put up a sign or locked his gate, but he didn't. Why? Because he wasn't mad anymore, he was planning. That laugh of hers, that "relax, Sam," stuck in his head, and it gave him an idea. A big, sneaky idea. One afternoon, Sam was sitting on his porch, watching the clouds roll by. His garden sparkled in the sunlight, but he wasn't smiling at it like usual. He was thinking. He tapped his foot on the wood and rubbed his chin. "She likes the ripe stuff," he said to himself. "The bright, juicy stuff." That's when it hit him like a light bulb popping on in his brain. He sat up straight, and a grin spread across his face. Not a mad grin, not a mean one, but a clever one. "You want my garden, Karen," he whispered. "Let's make it fun." Sam didn't tell anyone his idea. Not the kids who rode by on their bikes, not Mrs. Harper down the road, not even his own plants. This was his secret, and he liked it that way. He stood up, dusted off his pants, and walked into his house. He grabbed a little notebook from his kitchen table, the one he used to write down seed ideas, and flipped it open. With a pencil, he started scribbling. Not words, just little drawings. A pepper. A vine. A sneaky smile. He was planning something big, something that'd turn this whole mess around. And Karen? She had no clue. The next day, Sam went to town. He didn't tell anyone why, but he had a bounce in his step. He walked into the little store where Mr. Jenkins sold seeds and tools. "Morning, Sam," Mr. Jenkins said, sweeping the floor. "What's up?" Sam just smiled and said, "Need some special seeds today." Mr. Jenkins raised an eyebrow but didn't ask more. He pointed Sam to the back, where the seed packets hung on a rack. Sam looked through them, humming to himself, until he found what he wanted. He grabbed a packet, paid with a few dollars, and left with a grin. "See ya, Mr. Jenkins," he called, heading home with his secret tucked in his pocket. Back at his farm, Sam got to work. He didn't waste time. He cleared a little spot in his garden, not too big, just enough for something new. He knelt down with his trowel, digging small holes in the dirt. The sun was warm on his back, and sweat dripped off his nose, but he didn't care. He opened that seed packet and shook out tiny seeds into his hand. They were small, like little specks, but Sam knew they'd grow into something wild. He dropped them into the holes, covered them with dirt, and patted it down. Then he watered them, a big smile on his face. "Grow fast," he whispered to the dirt. "We've got a surprise to make." Karen kept sneaking over that week, but Sam didn't chase her anymore. He let her take a cucumber or a pepper, watching from his window sometimes. He'd see her shadow moving in the dark, hear her quiet giggles as she ran off. "Go ahead," he'd mutter to himself. "Take what you want for now." He wasn't worried anymore. He was waiting. Those little seeds were growing, and soon, they'd be ready. Karen thought she was winning, but Sam was setting a trap. A spicy trap. Let's picture Sam's garden again. The tomatoes were still red, the carrots were still crunchy, well, the ones Karen hadn't taken. But that new patch? It was starting to sprout. Tiny green shoots poked out of the dirt, reaching for the sun. Sam checked them every day, watering them, whispering to them like old friends. "You're my secret weapon," he'd say, grinning. He didn't tell Karen a thing. She didn't even notice the new plants. She was too busy grabbing the ripe stuff, thinking she was so smart. One night, Sam caught her again. He was up late, sipping tea by his window, when he saw her sneak over. She went straight for the peppers, bright yellow ones he'd left out on purpose. He didn't grab his flashlight this time. He just watched, leaning back in his chair. Karen yanked the peppers off the vine, stuffed them in her shirt, and scurried back to her house. Sam chuckled. "Enjoy those," he said quietly. "The real fun's coming soon." His plan was growing, just like those little sprouts. The tension was building now, friends. Karen was getting cockier every night, taking more and more. She'd laugh and skip away, thinking Sam was too soft to stop her. But Sam wasn't soft, he was sneaky. He'd stopped being mad and started being smart. Those new plants were his big idea, and they were almost ready. Karen had no idea what was coming. She thought she was the boss of this game, but Sam was about to flip the table. So, what do you think Sam's planting? What's his sneaky plan to get back at Karen? Drop your guesses in the comments, I'd love to hear them. This story's getting wilder every second, and the best part's still ahead. Karen's in for a shock, and Sam's grinning ear to ear waiting for it. Hey, friends. We're at the best part of Sam and Karen's story, the big moment where everything flips upside down. Sam's been quiet, watching Karen sneak into his garden night after night, taking his cucumbers, peppers, and more. But he's not mad anymore, he's got a sneaky plan. He's been growing something special, and Karen's about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong farmer. Get ready, because this is wild. Sam didn't waste any time after he decided to fight back. He'd been watching Karen, noticing how she always grabbed the ripest, brightest veggies. That gave him his big idea. One sunny afternoon, when the sky was blue and the birds were singing, he grabbed his trowel and went to work. He picked a spot in his garden, a little patch near the fence, not too big, just right for something new. He dug up the dirt, making it soft and ready, and then he planted his secret weapon, ghost peppers. Yup, those tiny red peppers that look pretty but burn hotter than a summer day. They're so spicy, just one bite can make your mouth feel like it's on fire. Sam didn't tell anyone about his plan, not the kids on their bikes, not Mrs. Harper down the road, not even Mr. Jenkins at the store where he'd bought the seeds. This was his little secret, and he loved it. He dropped those tiny seeds into the dirt, covered them up, and gave them a good splash of water. "Grow fast," he whispered, patting the soil with a grin. Then he stood up, brushed the dirt off his hands, and went back to his porch like nothing special was happening. But oh, something special was happening. Something big. Every day, Sam took care of those ghost peppers. He'd wake up early, before the sun was even high, and sneak out to his garden. He'd water them with his little can, making sure the dirt stayed wet. He'd pull any weeds that popped up, keeping the patch clean. He'd even talk to them sometimes, saying stuff like, You're gonna be my helpers, aren't you? The plants listened, growing taller and stronger every day. First, they were just tiny green sprouts, poking out of the ground. Then they got leaves, big and shiny. And finally, after a few weeks, little red peppers started to show up. They were small, like marbles, but so bright they glowed like rubies in the sunlight. Sam would kneel down and look at them, smiling big. Perfect, he'd say. Just perfect. Karen didn't notice a thing. She kept sneaking over at night, thinking she was so clever. She'd grab a cucumber here, a tomato there, whatever looked good. She didn't see the ghost peppers growing near the fence. They were too small, and she was too busy snatching the big stuff. Sam let her keep going. He didn't chase her anymore. He didn't yell. He just watched from his window sometimes, seeing her shadow move in the dark. Go ahead, he'd mutter to himself. Take what you want for now. He wasn't worried. His trap was almost ready, and Karen was walking right into it. The big night came fast. The moon was up, big and round, lighting up Sam's farm like a spotlight. The air was warm, and the crickets were chirping loud. Sam couldn't sleep, he was too excited. He sat by his window, peeking out through the curtains, waiting. His heart was pounding, thumping in his chest like a drum. Those ghost peppers were ripe now, hanging on their little plants, shiny and red. They looked so pretty, like candy or jewels. Sam knew Karen wouldn't be able to resist them. She loved the bright stuff, the ripe stuff. And tonight? Tonight was her night to find out what they really were. Sure enough, Karen came sniffing around. Sam saw her sneak over the fence, her sneakers quiet on the grass. She had a little bag with her this time, ready to stuff it full. She moved fast, looking at the tomatoes, the cucumbers, the beans. But then she stopped. Her head turned, and Sam held his breath. She'd seen them, the ghost peppers. They glowed in the moonlight, tiny and red, calling her over. Karen grinned, that same smug grin she always had, and shuffled toward the patch. Oh, what's this, she muttered to herself, bending down. She didn't know what they were. She didn't care. They looked good, so she wanted them. Karen reached out and grabbed a handful. She yanked 5 or 6 peppers off the plants, quick and greedy, and held them up to the moon. Nice, she whispered, stuffing them into her bag. She didn't even look around to see if Sam was watching. She thought she was safe, like always. She stood up, brushed her hands on her pants, and strutted back to her house, swinging that bag like she'd just won a prize. Sam watched her go, his heart racing faster. He didn't move. He didn't say a word. He just smiled a big, sneaky smile and waited. Inside his house, Sam sat back in his chair and laughed quietly. Oh, Karen, he said to himself. You've got no idea what's coming. He could barely sit still. He wanted to run outside and peek over the fence, but he didn't. He stayed put, imagining what was about to happen. Those ghost peppers weren't like his regular veggies. They weren't sweet or juicy or mild. They were hot, crazy hot. One bite, and Karen's mouth would feel like a volcano. Sam couldn't wait to hear her reaction. He knew it'd be loud. He knew it'd be wild. And he knew it'd be soon. The next morning, Sam woke up early. The sun was just peeking over the trees, painting the sky pink and orange. He didn't rush outside like usual. He took his time, making a cup of coffee, sipping it slow. He wanted to savor this. He knew something big was coming, and he didn't want to miss it. He pulled on his boots, grabbed his hat, and stepped onto his porch. The air was fresh, the birds were singing, and everything felt quiet, too quiet. Sam leaned on his fence, looking over at Karen's house, waiting. Then it happened. A scream, loud, wild, and piercing, ripped through the morning. It came from Karen's house, echoing across the farm like a siren. Sam's eyes went wide, and he couldn't help but grin. More screams followed, one after another, mixed with coughing and yelling. The door to Karen's house flew open, banging against the wall, and out she came. Karen burst outside, her face red as a tomato, not from embarrassment, but from the heat of those peppers. She was gulping water from a big jug, splashing it all over herself. Her eyes were watering, her mouth was open, and she was hopping around like her feet were on fire, too. "What did you do, Sam?" she shouted, her voice scratchy and loud. She spun around, looking at his farm, and pointed a shaky finger at him. "What are those things?" She coughed again, hard, and chugged more water, spilling half of it down her shirt. Her hair was a mess, sticking to her sweaty face, and she looked like she'd just run through a fire. Sam stood there, leaning on his fence, calm as could be. He didn't yell back. He didn't laugh, well, not out loud. He just smiled, a cool, steady smile, and shrugged his shoulders. "Told you to stop stealing, Karen," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Guess you picked the wrong peppers this time." He tipped his hat a little, like he was saying hello, and watched her flop onto her porch steps, still coughing and fanning her mouth. She glared at him, her eyes all teary, but she couldn't say much. Her tongue was too busy burning. Sam turned away from the fence and walked back to his garden. He knelt down by the ghost pepper patch, looking at the plants. A few were missing their peppers Karen's doing, but plenty were left. They still glowed red and pretty, like little rubies in the dirt. Sam chuckled to himself. "Good job, buddies," he said to the plants, patting the soil. His trap had worked better than he'd ever dreamed. Karen thought she was getting a free snack, but she got a fiery surprise instead. Back at her house, Karen was a mess. She ran inside, then ran back out with a glass of milk, gulping it down fast. "It burns," she yelled, her voice all wobbly. Neighbors started peeking out their windows, wondering what the noise was about. Kids stopped their bikes down the road, pointing and giggling. "What's wrong with Karen?" one of them asked. Sam heard it all from his garden, and he just kept smiling. This was it, the big reveal. Karen had finally learned what happens when you take what's not yours. Sam stood up and stretched, looking out at his farm. The sun was higher now, warming the air, and his garden looked peaceful again. The tomatoes were still red, the carrots were still growing, and those ghost peppers. They were the stars of the show. He didn't feel mad anymore. He didn't feel worried. He felt good. Karen had pushed him too far, and he'd pushed back quietly, cleverly, perfectly. Karen stayed on her steps, panting and wiping her face. She didn't yell at Sam again. She didn't come stomping over. She just sat there, red-faced and quiet, sipping her milk. For the first time ever, she didn't look smug. She looked beat. Sam's plan had hit her hard, and she knew it. She'd thought he was soft, weak, easy to trick. But now she knew the truth. Sam was tougher than he looked, and he wasn't afraid to fight back in his own sneaky way. This was the climax, friends, the moment everything came crashing down for Karen and lifted up for Sam. He'd turned her greed into a lesson, and oh, what a lesson it was. Those tiny peppers had done what yelling never could. They'd shut her up and sent her running. Sam didn't need to shout or argue. He let his garden do the talking, and it spoke loud and clear. So, what do you think of Sam's big trick? Did Karen deserve that spicy surprise? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to hear them. This story's been a wild ride, and we're not done yet. Sam's got his garden back, but what happens next? Stick around to find out. Hey, friends. We're at the end of Sam and Karen's crazy adventure, and it's time to see how everything wraps up. Sam just pulled off the sneakiest trick ever with those ghost peppers, and Karen got a big, spicy surprise she'll never forget. She screamed, she ran, and Sam just smiled. Now let's find out what happened next, how the town reacted, how Sam got his peace back, and how Karen learned her lesson the hard way. Get ready for a fun finish. The morning after Karen's big pepper meltdown was bright and sunny. The air was warm, the birds were chirping, and Sam's little farm looked happy again. Sam stood by his fence, sipping his coffee, watching the world wake up. Over at Karen's house, things weren't so calm. She was still a mess from those ghost peppers, her face red, her eyes puffy, her voice all scratchy from yelling. She sat on her porch steps, a big glass of milk in her hand, gulping it down like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Every few seconds, she'd fan her mouth with her other hand, muttering, "It still burns." Sam could hear her from his side of the fence, and he couldn't help but grin. His plan had worked better than he'd ever hoped. Word spread fast in that little town. It was like a wildfire, jumping from house to house quicker than you could blink. Neighbors had heard Karen's screams. They were so loud, How could they not? People started peeking out their windows, pulling back curtains to see what was going on. Mrs. Harper, who lived down the road, leaned out her kitchen window and saw Karen hopping around, splashing water on her face. What's she doing? Mrs. Harper asked herself, then started laughing when she figured it out. Mr. Jenkins, the store owner, was sweeping his sidewalk when a kid rode by on a bike and shouted, "Karen ate something spicy and she's freaking out." Mr. Jenkins chuckled and shook his head. "Serves her right," he mumbled. Kids on their bikes stopped near Sam's farm, pointing at Karen's house and giggling. "She's all red," one yelled. "She's drinking milk like a baby," another added. They laughed so hard they almost fell off their seats. Pretty soon, the whole town was buzzing. People walked by Sam's place slower than usual, sneaking looks at Karen sitting there, fanning her mouth. Some waved at Sam and gave him a thumbs up, like they knew he'd done something clever. Sam just waved back, keeping his cool, but inside, he felt proud. Really proud. Karen didn't come near Sam's garden that day or any day after that. Not even close. She stayed on her side of the fence, glaring over sometimes, but she didn't dare step foot on his farm. Those ghost peppers had scared her good. Her mouth still tingled from the heat, and every time she thought about sneaking over, she'd remember that burn. "No way," she'd mutter to herself, shaking her head. "Not worth it." She'd learned her lesson, and it was a hot one. Sam's trap had worked like magic. She wasn't stealing anymore, and that was that. Sam didn't waste time celebrating too long. He had a garden to fix. The next day, he grabbed his trowel, his seeds, and his watering can, and got to work. He cleared out the empty spots where Karen had taken his veggies. The holes in the carrot patch. He filled them with new seeds, patting the dirt down nice and smooth. The vines where his tomatoes used to hang. He planted more, humming a little tune as he worked. He even added some cucumbers and peppers, the regular kind, not the spicy ones, making sure his garden was full again. The ghost peppers stayed, though. Sam liked them. They were his little heroes, and he wasn't getting rid of them anytime soon. Day by day, Sam's farm started to look like it used to. The sun shone down, the plants grew tall, and that peaceful feeling came back. He'd wake up early, put on his straw hat, and walk out to his garden with a big smile. "Morning, buddies," he'd say to his plants, giving them a splash of water. The tomatoes turned red again, the carrots poked out of the dirt, and the cucumbers hung green and fat. It was like nothing had ever happened except it had, and Sam knew it. He'd beaten Karen at her own game, and his farm was his once more. The folks in town? They couldn't stop talking about it. Everywhere Sam went, people had something to say. "Hey, Sam," they'd call out when he walked by the store. "Heard you taught Karen a lesson." Sam would just nod and tip his hat, keeping it simple. "Yup," he'd say, "she won't be back." Kids started calling him Pepper Sam, like it was his superhero name. "Pepper Sam. Pepper Sam," they'd chant when he waved at them. It made him laugh. Even old Mr. Jenkins joined in, saying, "Pepper Sam, you're a legend now." Sam didn't mind the nickname. He kind of liked it. It was proof he'd stood up for himself and won. Whenever Sam walked through town, people would tip their hats or give him a big smile. "Good job, Pepper Sam," they'd say, and he'd smile back. It wasn't just about the peppers, it was about what they meant. Sam had been the quiet guy, the nice guy, the one nobody thought would fight back. But he did. He fought back with his brain, not his fists, and everyone respected that. Even Mrs. Harper stopped by one day with a pineapple, his favorite. "This is for you, Pepper Sam," she said. "You showed that Karen who's boss." Sam took the pie and blushed a little. "Ah, thanks," he said. "Just doing what I had to." Karen, though. She wasn't happy. She stayed inside most days, peeking out her window now and then. Her yard was still messy, tall grass, old cans, that broken chair, but she didn't boss people around as much anymore. The town noticed that, too. "She's quieter now," they'd whisper to each other. "Guess those peppers shut her up." Karen didn't like losing, and she really didn't like that everyone knew about it. But she couldn't do anything. She'd tried to take Sam's stuff, and it backfired big time. Her mouth still remembered that heat, and so did her pride. One afternoon, Sam was out in his garden, pulling weeds like usual. The sun was warm, his hat kept the light off his face, and his plants looked happy. He heard a noise and looked up. Karen was on her porch, staring at him. She didn't say anything, just glared with her arms crossed. Sam didn't glare back. He just waved, nice and friendly, like always. "Morning, Karen," he called out. She didn't wave back. She huffed, turned around, and stomped inside, slamming her door. Sam chuckled and went back to his weeds. "Guess she's still mad," he said to himself. But he didn't care. She wasn't his problem anymore. Peace returned to Sam's little farm, and it felt good. The days were calm again, no missing veggies, no sneaky shadows at night. He'd sit on his porch in the evenings, sipping lemonade, watching the sunset turn the sky orange and pink. His garden sparkled in the fading light: tomatoes, carrots, cucumbers, and those ghost peppers, all growing strong. The crickets chirped, the breeze rustled the leaves, and Sam felt like himself again. "This is my place," he'd say, leaning back in his chair. "And it's staying mine." The town kept buzzing about Pepper Sam for weeks. Kids made up stories about him, like how he could grow peppers so hot they'd make a dragon cry. "Pepper Sam's the toughest farmer ever," they'd say, racing their bikes past his house. Grown ups told the tale at the store or the park, laughing about Karen's red face and wild screams. "She won't mess with him again," they'd say, nodding. Not after that. It became a little legend in that small town, a story about a quiet guy who stood up to a bully and won with a handful of spicy peppers. Karen learned her lesson the hard way. She'd thought Sam was easy to trick, someone she could push around. She'd taken his tomatoes, his carrots, his cucumbers, and laughed about it. But messing with Sam's garden? That was a mistake. Those ghost peppers showed her what happens when you steal from the wrong person. She felt the heat, oh, she felt it, and it burned away her sneaky ways. She didn't come near that fence again. Not once. She'd look at Sam's farm sometimes, her eyes narrow and grumpy, but she stayed away. "Never again," she'd mutter, rubbing her tongue like she could still taste the fire. Sam didn't brag about it. He didn't need to. His garden was safe, his peace was back, and the town had his back. He'd replanted his veggies, and they grew better than ever. The tomatoes got juicier, the carrots got crunchier, and the cucumbers got bigger. Every time he picked one, he'd smile and think about those ghost peppers. "Thanks, little buddies," he'd say, holding up a tomato or a carrot. "You did good." His farm was his again, and no one, not Karen, not anyone, would take that away. Life went on, and Sam stayed the same old Sam, quiet, kind, hard-working. But now everyone knew he wasn't just nice. He was smart, too. And tough when he had to be. Pepper Sam wasn't just a nickname, it was a promise. Mess with his garden, and you'd feel the heat. Karen found that out, and she'd never forget it. Neither would the town. They'd tip their hats, wave, and smile whenever he walked by, proud of their sneaky hero. So, friends, that's how justice was served, hot and spicy. Sam got his farm back, Karen got her lesson, and peace settled in like a soft blanket. What do you think of Sam's big win? Did Karen get what she deserved? Drop your ideas in the comments, I'd love to hear them. This story's been a blast, and Sam's garden is safe at last. What a ride. Hey, friends. We've made it to the end of Sam and Karen's wild story, and what a ride it's been. Sam's garden got raided, Karen got sneaky, and those ghost peppers turned everything upside down. Sam won, Karen learned her lesson, and the town started calling him Pepper Sam. Now it's time to wrap it all up with some big thoughts and a little inspiration. Let's talk about what the story means and what you might do if you were in Sam's shoes. Get ready, because this is gonna make you think. So here's the thing, friends, sometimes the quiet ones have the best tricks up their sleeves. Sam wasn't loud like Karen. He didn't stomp around yelling or start a big fight. Nope, he stayed calm, watched, and waited. He let Karen think she was winning, grabbing his tomatoes, his carrots, his cucumbers, laughing like she was so smart. But Sam? He had a plan. He didn't need to shout or chase her off. He just planted those ghost peppers and let her dig her own hole. Or, well, bite her own pepper. That's the cool part. Sam didn't fight with his hands or his voice, he fought with his brain, and it worked like magic. Think about that for a second. Sam could have been mad all the time. He could have run over to Karen's house, banged on her door, and said, "Give me my stuff back." But would that have stopped her? Probably not. Karen was sassy and stubborn, she'd just laugh and keep stealing. Sam knew that. So instead of getting loud, he got sneaky. He used those tiny red peppers to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. And boy, did she feel it. Her screams, her red face, her gulping milk, it was all because Sam was quiet but clever. That's a big deal. It shows you don't always need to be the loudest person in the room to win. What's cool about Sam is how he stayed himself. He didn't turn into a mean guy or a bully. He didn't try to hurt Karen just to be nasty. He just wanted his garden back, his little piece of happiness. Those peppers weren't about revenge, they were about justice. Sam worked hard for his veggies. He planted them, watered them, pulled weeds, and watched them grow. Karen didn't care about that. She took his stuff like it was nothing, like his hard work didn't matter. But Sam showed her it did matter. He stood up for what was his, and he did it in a way that was smart and funny. That's inspiring, right? It makes you feel like you can stand up for yourself, too, even if you're not loud or big or tough. Let's imagine you're Sam for a minute. Picture it, someone's taking something that's yours. Maybe it's not veggies, maybe it's your favorite toy, your spot on the swings, or something you made with your own hands. They grab it, laugh, and act like you won't do anything. What do? Do you yell? Do you run and tell someone? Or do you think, like Sam did, and find a clever way to fix it? Sam's story says you don't always need to get loud. Sometimes, you just need a little spice, something small but strong that surprises them and makes them stop. It's like a secret power, and quiet people have it, too. Karen thought Sam was weak because he didn't shout back. She thought, oh, he's nice, he's quiet, he won't fight me. Big mistake. Sam was nice, sure, but he wasn't weak. He had strength inside him, quiet strength. He didn't need to show it off every day. He saved it for when it mattered, like when Karen pushed him too far. And when he used it? Wow, it was perfect. Those ghost peppers were tiny, but they were mighty. They shut Karen up fast and made her think twice. That's a lesson for all of us, you don't have to be loud to be strong. You can be quiet and still have power that surprises everyone. Now let's talk about Karen for a bit. She was loud, bossy, and sneaky. She thought she could take whatever she wanted because Sam wouldn't stop her. She dug her own hole, didn't she? Every time she grabbed a tomato or a carrot, she was making it worse for herself. And when she bit into those peppers, that was her big whoops moment. She didn't see it coming, but she should have. Sam warned her, he told her to stop stealing. She didn't listen, and boom, the heat hit her hard. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Karen thought she was the tricky one, but Sam tricked her right back. She bit her own pepper, and it burned her good. That's something to remember, friends. When you take stuff that's not yours, it might feel fun at first, like you're winning. But it catches up to you. Karen learned that the hard way. She didn't just get a spicy mouth, she got embarrassed, too. The whole town saw her hopping around, screaming and chugging milk. They laughed, they pointed, and they called Sam Pepper Sam like he was a hero. Karen's sneaky days were over, and all it took was a little red pepper to show her why. So next time someone tries to take what's yours, maybe you don't need to scream or cry. Maybe you just need a clever idea, like Sam's, to turn it around. Sam's story makes you feel good, doesn't it? He didn't let Karen win. He didn't let her ruin his garden or his happiness. He fought back in his own way, and he got his peace back. That's inspiring. It's like a little light that says, hey, you can do this, too. You don't have to be the biggest or the loudest to stand up for yourself. You can be quiet, think smart, and still come out on top. Sam didn't change who he was, he stayed the nice guy who loved his farm. But he showed everyone he wasn't a pushover. He had a trick up his sleeve, and it was a hot one. Think about your own life for a second. Has anyone ever tried to take something from you? Maybe a friend who keeps borrowing your stuff and never gives it back. Or a kid at school who takes your spot in line. What would you do? Sam didn't fight with words or fists, he used peppers. You might not have ghost peppers lying around, but you've got your own tricks, right? Maybe it's telling a teacher, making a funny plan, or just saying no in a way they don't expect. Sam's story shows you can protect what's yours without being mean or loud. You just need a little spice, something small that packs a punch. Karen's big lesson was loud and clear: don't mess with people's stuff. She thought she could sneak and grab and laugh, but Sam showed her she couldn't. She felt the heat, and it stopped her cold. That's justice, friends. Sam didn't hurt her, he didn't need to. He let her own greed trip her up. She bit that pepper all by herself, and it was her own fault. Next time someone tries to take what's yours, maybe you don't need to get mad or loud. Maybe you can be like Sam, quiet, clever, and ready with a little surprise. It worked for him, and it can work for you, too. Let's picture Sam one more time. He's on his porch, sipping lemonade, watching the sunset. His garden's growing again: tomatoes, carrots, cucumbers, all safe and sound. Those ghost peppers are still there, little red guards keeping watch. He's smiling, happy, peaceful. Karen's over at her house, quiet for once, staying away. The town's calling him Pepper Sam, tipping their hats, proud of their sneaky hero. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just planted a trick, and it fixed everything. That's the magic of the story: quiet can be strong, and smart can be mighty. So here's the big takeaway, friends: you've got power inside you, even if you're not loud. Sam proved it. He didn't let Karen steal his happiness, he took it back with a grin and a pepper. Next time someone tries to take what's yours, think about Sam. You don't need to shout or cry or run away. You can stand tall, use your brain, and find your own little spice. It might be a word, a plan, or just a smile that says, "I'm not giving up." Whatever it is, it's yours, and it's strong. What would you have done to teach Karen a lesson? Would you plant something spicy like Sam? Would you tell her off? Would you make a trap? Drop your ideas below, I'm dying to hear them. Sam's story is all about being clever and brave, and I bet you've got some awesome tricks, too. This adventure's over, but the fun's not. Let's see what you think. Pepper Sam showed us how it's done, and now it's your turn to shine.